Hi there, this is the 5th episode in the Making Cyberglads series. I'm building a game called Cyberglads using the Godot game engine. In the last episode, I introduced 3 NPC configurations, 3 named NPCs that the player could fight against with the temporary names Ernie, Bert, and Kermit. Ernie is the easiest to play against, Kermit is the hardest. But the player couldn't yet pick which NPC they wanted because the NPC name was still hard-coded in the global script. I want that value to be set by the player before the start of the game. The best place to do that is in a splash screen with a few buttons. Let's create one now. So I'm going to go to my editor and create a new scene. I'm going to add a root node based on texture rect. Then I'm going to call splash for splash screen. And I'm going to immediately save this new scene as a packed scene in the scenes folder. I want the splash screen to be the first thing the player sees, so let's change the game's main scene to make it the splash screen. So I'm going to go to my project settings, and in my run configuration, I'm going to change the main scene. So far, the arena scene was the main scene, and I'm going to change that to splash. And I've messed that up, good. Right, so splash is now my main scene. To make it less bland, I'll add a starry sky as a background for my splash screen. So I'm going to add a texture here to my splash node. I'm going to go to Assets, GFX, Splash, and here I have my background that I can just drag and drop into the texture property. And here I have my starry sky background. It's not going to be super pretty at this point. At one point, I'm going to go back and design a good-looking splash screen, but at the moment, I just want to put some basics in place. Under the splash node, I'm going to add a VBox container that I'm going to call NPC buttons. So just add a child node based on VBox container. I've covered containers in a previous video. VBox container that I'm going to call NPC buttons. I want to have 3 buttons, one for each of the 3 NPCs, and I want them to be arranged vertically, hence the VBox container. And now I'm going to add a texture button for each of the 3 NPCs that the player can choose from under my NPC buttons node. So I'm going to add just the one texture button, and I'm just going to use Control D to create 2 more versions of it. So 3 texture buttons now. I'm just using texture buttons on the splash page instead of regular buttons so that I can use these pimped Godot logos that you see here on the left of the screen as textures. Each texture button can have a normal texture. If you open the textures property, you have a normal texture, and then you can use alternate textures for different states of the button, when it's pressed, when it's hovered over, etc. So for each button, I'm going to load different textures for different situations. So for my first button, I'm going to use this classic blue Godot logo as the normal texture, and I'm going to use this white Godot logo for pressed and hover states. And for my second button, I'm going to use the white logo as, I have to open my textures property. I'm going to use, as I said, my white Godot logo as my normal texture, and I'm going to use the blue logo. For some reason, this opened, so I'm going to use the blue logo in my pressed and my hover states. And then for my third button, I'm going to use this nifty red logo. I forgot to open the textures property again, silly me. All right, here we go, and I'm going to use the white one for the alternate states. Kill this. Some node appeared there, so sorry. In my third button, I need this white logo as alternate textures. There, I have my 3 buttons that have appeared on screen. I'm just going to rename the buttons so that they match the NPC name that each one will load the game with. So the first button will be the Ernie button. And then I'm going to have a Bert button. And I'm going to have a Kermit button. Before I start programming the actions behind each button, I'm going to move my VBox container to the right of the screen, and I'm going to add some space between the different buttons. So just fairly easily here, I'm going to select my VBox container. I'm going to go into move mode, and I'm just going to move the VBox container here, just about here. Oops, there. And then I'm going to select my Ernie button. I'm going to move it towards the top of the screen ever so slightly, and the Kermit button, I'm going to move it down. So I'm using a grid here. You don't quite see the grid very well because of the black background, and I also have the snap to grid enabled, but otherwise I'm not making any extra effort to get this pixel perfect, because as you can probably imagine, this is a temporary layout for my splash screen. So I'm just going to save my splash screen. I have, so when the player hits one of the buttons, I need to set a global variable with the name of the selected opponent. First, let's attach a script to the splash node. So my splash node needs a script attached, which I'm going to save in the scripts folder. Scripts. Get it right eventually. And now I'm going to go to the node tab for each of the buttons, and I'm going to connect a signal from the pressed events on each of the buttons to a function on this new splash script. So I'm going to connect the pressed event on the Ernie button, on the Bert button, and on the Kermit button. And so I have my 3 new functions here in this new script. Now let's rewrite all 3 functions to set the NPC name variable in the global script, depending on what button was pressed, and load the arena scene. So I'm just going to replace all these functions here by new versions that just set the NPC name to either Ernie, Bert, or Kermit, and then call the load arena function, which itself just changes the scene to the arena scene. So just loading the game with a new NPC name. All right, I'm ready to test this, so let's run the game. In the last video, I fought against Ernie and Bert, so this time I'm going to pick Kermit. I need to press the 3rd button. Kermit is the hardest of the 3 potential opponents, so wish me luck. So here we go. Kermit! Okay, I'm going to try to avoid him as much as I can, and hopefully I can survive a little bit. And he got me. All right. Let's move back to the editor. All right, that was a bruising fight. One more thing I want to do is put in place a loop so that the game proposes another fight at the end of the current one. A game is finished when either the player or the NPC dies. Whatever the result, a big play again button appears at the top of the arena scene. It leads back to the splash screen to select a new opponent. Let's go back to the arena scene and add the play again button. So in my arena scene, I'm going to switch back to 2D view here. I'm going to add a button, just a normal button, regular button. Then I'm going to place just here, just over the HUD. Right. I'm going to set it, so we're just going to call it play again. No? Play again. I'm going to set its text to play again. And I'm going to set a custom font. New dynamic font, and I'm just going to select the usual font in here. I'm going to load my font, and I'm going to set its size to 48. there. So you see the play again button there, and I'm just going to, I want the play again button to appear in front of the arena at the end of the game. And here I have a problem. The arena is in front of the button. Let's fix that by using the z-index property on the tile map. We want it to always display under everything else, so we'll set its z-index value to -1. So I'm going to select my tile map, and I'm going to look for the z-index property. Here it is, and I'm just going to set it to -1. And now the play again button appears again. So going back to my play again button, I'm going to make it a bit bigger. I'm going to take the rect property and pick the size property here, and I'm going to set its size to 700 by 160. Yeah, and then I'm going to move it back towards the center of the arena. So once again, I'm not trying to do anything pixel perfect here. I'm just trying to get some basics rolling. I am going to change the color here by changing the custom style. Sorry, I'm going to select a new style box flat for the style of the button, and I'm going to choose a flat color that is going to be the same as the one that I'm already using for the texture progress, just to have a semblance of harmony. So here, I'm just picking this color there and just saving for it to appear. It should appear. Well, let's just already select. Let's go back, play again. I'm also going to set the hover and press styles. So here I want another style box flat, and I'm going to use just the alternate color that I'm using in the texture progress, just to have an alternate color on the button as well when we hover over it or press it. There, and moving back to the inspector, I'm just going to copy this. Sorry, I'm just going to paste this maybe since it's the last thing I did. It should be in the Godot clipboard. Should be able to just paste it here. No, I cannot. Okay, well, let's just select here a new style box flat and just select the same color here. There. Okay, that's fine. Let's just save the arena scene. Oh, and one more thing. We do need to make sure that the button isn't visible by default. Otherwise, the player won't be able to see the arena while the game is in progress. So it should only appear when one of the two characters dies. So I'm going to go back to my button here, and I'm going to find its visibility property and set it to visible. So set it to off. So you just seen the button disappear there. And so let's add a function to make the play again button appear again on command. The place to do this is in a script linked to the arena's root node, but we don't have one yet, so let's create it. So yeah, believe it or not, there is no script on the arena node yet. And so I'm going to add one called arena.gd, and I'm going to save it in the scripts folder. There, and I'm just going to add a function that sets the button's visibility back on. The new function should be called at the end of the game. So let's trigger it in a new end of game function. So I'm just adding an end of game function that calls the function that we've just added. The game ends when one of the two characters die. When that happens, we need to call this function. So let's add that call in the character script. Remember that it's in the character script, and more specifically in the take damage function, that this decision is made whether the game continues or not based on the health of the character. If that health, so number of hit points, goes down to 0 or below, the character dies and it's the end of the game. So let's just call the end of game function on the arena node here at the end of the take damage function. We're calling the function by going back to the tree's root and selecting the arena node. I'm not using a relative path here to select the arena node this time because I want to make sure that this code will still work even if the character node's position changes in the node tree at some point in the future. The last thing we need to do is write the function that is called, when the play again button is pressed. It should simply reload the splash screen. Let's connect a new signal from the play again button's pressed event to a function on the arena script. So let's go to the node tab here and select the pressed event, and I'm going to connect this event to a function on the new arena script. Here it is. And in the arena script, I'm just going to replace this function with another function that just calls the load splash screen function here, and that's load splash screen function. What it does is it reloads the splash screen at the end of the game when the play again button is pressed. All right, now that I have a function that is called at the end of the game, I'm going to take the opportunity to change the text in the HUD's message node. It doesn't make sense to keep saying let the best troll win if one of them is dead. Instead, I wanted to say who won the match. So let's revisit the end of game function in the arena node. So I'm just going to add a few lines at the end of the end of game function. Got to get my indents right. And here I'm going to call another end of game function, this time on the HUD, passing the winner name. So the winner of the game is either the player or the NPC, and here I'm getting the winner name from the global script, depending on the states of the two characters. So one of the two is obviously dead at the end of the game. If it's the player that is still alive at the end of the game, it means that the player won. Otherwise, it's the NPC. It makes sense that the HUD should be responsible for changing the message label because message isn't part of the arena scene. So you see that there is no concept of message here. If we go to, I'm going to just open my HUD scene here into the view, and you'll see here that the message node that currently displays let the best troll win by default is under the HUD, in the HUD scene. So here I need to add the end of game function in my HUD that's going to change the text in the message node. So going back to script and my HUD node here. So this is my end of game function that takes a winner name and just sets the text to winner name is victorious. All right, with this we're ready to playtest the game. Here we go. So I'm going to run the game. I have my splash screen. This time I'm going to pick Ernie. When I want the game to last longer, I take Ernie because he's a lot slower and easier to beat than the other two. So let's go and kick his ass. I don't even move for this. So I've beaten Ernie, and you see that the label says player is victorious. I have my play again button. When I hover, it changes color. I'm going to click it. I'm back in my splash screen. This time I'm going to pick Bert. It should go a lot faster with Bert. So I'm just going to let Bert beat me here. So you see that if I take my time and don't attack, well, Bert is victorious. And I have my play again button. If I click it, I'm back to my splash screen. Right. Splash screens vary enormously depending on the type of game, the context, and the medium. Splash screens can just act as a buffer to keep the player waiting for the game to start without getting too bored. They can also give the game designer an opportunity to get input from the player. For example, you can ask what difficulty the player wants to play at, or how they want their avatar to look like. Splash screens are also a good place to showcase your graphic design skills without being hindered by gameplay constraints, since the game hasn't typically started when you load the splash screen.
Cyberglads doesn't feature any custom art yet, but I have a few ideas about how the splash screen could look like in the future. In this sense, the humble splash screen is sometimes a critical part of game marketing because it's the first thing that the player sees and is often used in promotional material on Steam or on app stores. Finally, a splash page can allow users to log into the game either with custom credentials or using their social media identities. Here are a few examples of splash screens built with Godot. You can find the links in the video description below. Guideline by DB Coded is a game that has a nice classic mobile splash screen featuring the alien Strox and a couple of buttons. Brazilian game developer Gus made a cute splash page for his Flappy Mario game, and Deep Sixth by Little Red Dog Games has an original splash page featuring a rotating space station. That's it for this episode of Making Cyberglads. The current version of Cyberglads is available for download on the cyberglads.com website. Just showing this to you. You have the download button here. I'd be really grateful if you could give it a spin and try to beat all 3 NPCs. Let me know how it went for you and if you found them too easy or too challenging. Thanks for listening.